Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello out there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with another edition of Binnall of America Audio, Season 2. It is March 10th, 2007, and this week we have for you the first installment in a marathon session with esoteric pundit Mac Tonnies. In this portion of the interview, we're going to be talking about Mac's book, After the Martian Apocalypse, which is all about the mysterious and devious Mars anomalies. You know what I'm talking about. The face on Mars, Cydonia, and all the other assorted strange things found on the red planet. We're going to dig into all that stuff with Mac Tonnies. We're going to hear about NASA and how they fit into this whole equation of Mars anomalies. And we're going to smash the fourth wall and talk about the Mars anomaly research community, how it got started, how it evolved, all that great stuff. Plus, of course, tons and tons more here with Mac Tonnies. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Mac Tonnies, let me give you a little bit of background on him. Mac Tonnies is an author/essayist whose futuristic fiction and speculative essays have appeared in many print and online publications. He is the author of Illuminated Black, a collection of science fiction short stories, and After the Martian Apocalypse. Mac maintains Post-Human Blues, a widely read blog devoted to emerging technologies and paranormal phenomena, and is a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research. He lives in Kansas City, Missouri, where he writes, reads, and surfs the net. He is currently at work on a new book about the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. His blog is www.posthumanblues.blogspot.com, and his formal website is mactonnies.com, mactonnies.com. Without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was recorded on January 20th, 2007. Mac Tonnies on Binnall of America Audio, Season 2. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Binnall of America Audio. 2006 was sort of the year Mac Tonnies became a meme in and of himself. It was really a breakout year. A lot of people were talking about Mac Tonnies. We finally got him here on Binnall of America Audio. Mac is a prolific blogger, and you can find more information on him, and he posts just voraciously at posthumanblues.blogspot.com, and he's the author of After the Martian Apocalypse. Welcome to the show, Mac.
Thank you. It is a pleasure.
Let's get a little bit of the bio and the background and, sort of tell everybody who is Mac Tonnies and what you're all about and how you sort of gravitated toward the esoteric field.
Well, in a nutshell, I suppose I've always been extremely interested in the paranormal, read a lot about it, wrote a lot about it, but before the internet, there was really no way to communicate some of my thinking on issues like this. And I kind of discovered the internet, or the web rather, when it emerged in the mid-1990s. And I've been messing around with my website and stuff pretty much since then. And the first thing that really people started reading on a recurring basis was my Mars website, the Cydonian Imperative, which is what the Mars book ultimately was based on. And that was just it was kind of a blog in its own right before blogs became popular. It wasn't a fancy blog, just kind of an online journal of just different discoveries and stuff, and just musings on different discoveries and different landforms and different photographs, and it kind of got into some of the controversy as far as different personalities in the field are concerned. Some of the more far-fetched ideas being thrown around, and that was a lot of fun, and I kept it up for a long time, and it's still not officially defunct. It's just kind of gone into standby until new pictures are taken that can confirm or not confirm some of the theories and hunches that I developed during the period I was working on the site. So it's still there, and it's still kind of a big part of my website. It gets probably more visitors than the other parts combined. I guess I'm kind of hard to classify because I'm really big on fiction and other aspects of the paranormal, not just Mars. I found that the Mars anomaly community is very insulated in that it seems very, very concentrated on the Martian landscape and finding new enigmas and taking NASA to task for dealing with various subjects in a disingenuous manner. But I've kind of widened my scope from that. That fascinates me, and it continues to fascinate me. But I think it's part of a much bigger picture, a much bigger intellectual picture. And I guess if anything makes me unique, is that I just never felt really the need to be pigeonholed. You know, I don't think it's a good decision, and it doesn't come naturally to me.
Let's dig right into After the Martian Apocalypse. For starters, let's clear up this book issue situation, because when I talked to you recently, I was trying to get a hold of the book, and I can't get a hold of the book. And with your explosion in popularity in the last year, it seems like there's even more interest now in picking up a copy of the book. So what's going on with After the Martian Apocalypse?
Yeah, this appears to be one of those problems with conventional publishing. You print up a run, and it's very inflexible because they're out there and then they're gone, and it's very hard to get it back on the shelves after that. Simon & Schuster is able to say that it is still in print because you can still buy electronic copies, and you can buy all kinds of different formats. If you go to simonsays.com and enter in the name of the book or my name, you'll get your choice of download. You can get a PDF, you can get all kinds of mobile different formats like that. So the book is still technically out there, and you can read preview chapters apparently on Google Books.
Yep.
But it's very hard to find a print copy now. It's kind of become this rare book, and it happened really fast.
Yeah.
So I'm forced to assume that someone was at least buying it, which is heartening. I'll wait and see, get some numbers on that. I'm not really sure if I'm making royalties or what. But yeah, the book's only came out 2.5 years ago, so it's not that old.
What sort of drove your interest in Mars in general? As you said, it's sort of a little niche within the esoteric realm. So what was it about Mars that piqued your interest and made it part of what your focus was?
Well, I've always been interested in it, which is a total cliche, but there you go. But I was on a mailing list back in, it would have been, mid-late 90s, and I just mentioned, it was a technology-oriented mailing list, and I mentioned something about an upcoming opportunity to re-image the face on Mars. You know, this is good, we should do this. Mm-hmm. Let's pay attention. And the reaction was just complete scorn and unreasoning and hatred, basically. Like, how dare you even suggest this? You're a believer. You're a crackpot. It's like, what the heck? And I realized there was this, for the first time, I mean, I already knew, but for the first time really slammed home how divisive this issue was.
Yeah.
You're either on this side or you're on this side. And that really angered me, and I started writing about the issue of relating to the schism between this believer-debunker dichotomy, which I believe is completely bogus. And that's kind of what started this Sidonian imperative formally, that dissatisfaction with this totally artificially inflated schism between these two perceived polarities. So that's anger started the Sidonian imperative.
There you go. And now, for people who haven't checked out After the Martian Apocalypse and can't get a hold of it because of all these issues, just give sort of a thumbnail scope of what it's about, and in general, I guess from what I can gather, it's a case for researching Mars and Mars anomalies.
The book doesn't draw any hard and fast conclusions. It's lots of speculation based on observable data, and I justify it simply by the fact that this is all testable by going to Mars properly equipped and looking at the surface. I take NASA to task for its ostensible search for life on Mars, which it's not really doing. It's looking for interesting geology, and while there's nothing wrong with that, it's not a search for life. We don't have any experiments on the Martian surface right now that are equipped to actually search the soil for life forms, let alone scan the landscape for possible archaeological sites. If NASA were truly interested in looking for such things, it would have archaeologists on the team. On JPL's team. Instead, we don't see that. We see lots of people, lots of geologists, well-intentioned geologists, with no interest in such things. And I think that's a tragedy, and I think the public is being led astray by these constant mantric references to the search for life. That's used to justify the budget for craft like the Mars exploration rovers and others. But that's not what we're seeing right now, and we need to break out of this cycle. So the book is just a rundown of various enigmas on the surface of Mars, And again, I don't draw any conclusions, but I'm actually a cautious optimist that some of these features will turn out to be more than mere piles of rock.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings me to my first, real big question here, the face is sort of the foundation of all Mars enigmas, really. What's your stance on the face, just in general?
The face is an incredibly interesting landform, which of course, may be more than a landform. Even if it is just geology, it is not merely a hill, as you often hear skeptics say, or so-called skeptics. It's a very unusual formation in many respects. It has a very strong non-fractal signature, for one thing, which would indicate that it might owe its existence to something other than blind natural processes. Whatever the face is, it's not the only thing on Mars. I think lots of debunkers have rallied around the point where, the face doesn't really look that face-like when you look at it up close. And indeed, it's got lots of degradation and lots of abrasion. But that does not mean that it's not a face. If you look at lots of archaeological sites right here on Earth, we didn't even know they were artificial until very recently, with the advent of remote sensing technology. Because they're so old, they've begun to recede into the environment, recede into the landscape.
Yeah.
And with many of the objects on Mars, and again, it's not just the face, it's lots of other things. Curiously enough, in the vicinity of the face, in the Cydonia region, we find things that look like they were once much more pronounced than they are now, but they're beginning to be consumed by the landscape to the point where they look tantalizingly like they might be natural features. But we're at this point now where we can make that determination, but I'm just not sure that we're collectively intellectually capable of handling that idea. We're addicted to this. Either throw it out. It's bunk. It's the will to believe. It's the predisposition to see faces and whatnot. And on the other hand, you've got people who see every little pixel and see some conspiracy in this. So I don't think that's a healthy situation.
Yeah. And then one of the strange aspects about the face is that it really, in the spectrum of esoteric topics, really, the face on Mars is sort of on the lower end of the ladder. Why do you think the face has gotten that sort of reputation? It's like below UFOs, but it's above moon hoax. Do you know
exactly.
what I mean? I'm trying to put it in the spectrum.
Right. It's in a limbo state. It really is. And I think a lot of that is attributable to NASA's attempted scotching of the issue back in 1998.
Yeah.
That was when the Mars Global Surveyor went into orbit and started taking pictures, and it took this incredibly bad shot from an angle through a haze in the atmosphere. And NASA presented it in the extremely substandard format. They used a high-pass filter, which anyone with a Photoshop manual can probably look this up and see that the purpose of using a high-pass filter is to suppress detail. And it seems pretty obvious that this was used intentionally. Of course, advocates of the NASA cover-up hypothesis will immediately state that they know the face is real and they're trying to hoodwink the public. I do not personally believe that. I think that while the use of the high-pass filter was intentional, I think it was probably done out of a sense of, we know this is nothing, so let's just hasten the process a little bit for the good of everyone.
Yeah.
For everyone's intellectual well-being. So and I think a lot of that pretty much scotched the issue in the public mind for a lot of people. However, there are many qualified people in the scientific community who are not fooled by that and are continuing to look at this issue objectively.
You sort of poo-poo the idea of conspiracy with regards to the face and NASA. So what do you subscribe that sort of antagonistic relationship between NASA and face research?
I've seen an atmosphere of kind of cultivated bureaucratic incompetence. That and the combination of it can't be, therefore it isn't. Mm-hmm. We're seeing kind of like the equivalent of Menzel and UFO lore attributed to features on Mars as opposed to objects in our own skies. It's very similar, and it shares very deep roots with the schism, the belief schism in the UFO community. And I think both sides could probably learn from the other.
Yeah. So you don't attribute it to like a shadowy conspiracy. It's more just that...
It's tempting to speculate about shadowy conspiracies, and it's often very fun to do so. I'm not aware of any hard and fast evidence that would allude to a conspiracy. That's not to say there isn't one. That's the fun of coming up with conspiracy theories, is that you don't have to prove it. It's a theory, and you can make it sound as plausible as you're capable of, but that doesn't make it real. And they're kind of sexy, you know. It's fun. It's fun to have a good conspiracy theory, and I'm agnostic on the issue. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm not saying there isn't a shadowy faction within the scientific community, at least on the government end of it. That's aware of the possibility of detecting extraterrestrial artifacts and the repercussions that might entail if they're discovered and publicized. There very well could be. It's a good question, and I play with it in the book a little bit. But it's a much more nuanced and subtle controversy than it's typically made out to be on your typical online source.
Extrapolate on that last statement a little bit. What do you mean that it's more subtle?
Well, I don't think it's a case of the typical thing you're asked to believe when you read lots of screeds online is that NASA has known for a long time that the face and accompanying objects are artificial beyond reasonable doubt, and they've like the Mars Observer, which was the first spacecraft to have had the capability of resolving these features on the surface with pretty good clarity. It went offline shortly before it went into orbit around Mars. And a big theory is that this was intentionally taken offline so that NASA could take pictures in secret and not show the public. Yeah. And I don't think that really holds up. I think again we're dealing with an issue of it can't be, therefore it isn't. And to me that makes more sense than the notion that NASA already knew. If NASA already knew, they'd have to have a way of knowing. Mm-hmm. There would have to be some aspect to our space program that we could point to and say, okay, this is when they discovered it. Instead, we don't see anything like that. Instead, we're asked to believe all kinds of different occult scenarios that just don't really seem to hold water.
Yeah. The way you look at it kind of does stand to reason in a way, because if NASA was interested in covering up the face in the first place, they were the ones who released the picture from the get-go.
Right. It's very elliptical. Yeah. Yet they released the picture. Why on earth do that at all? And don't tell me it was done as a psychological test, to test the public's readiness to accept artifacts on Mars. That doesn't make any sense either. So yeah, it's all a very dissatisfying issue when you look at it up close, and it's an issue where everyone has to be right. And I think what made me at least somewhat controversial was the fact that I didn't want to perpetuate this particular controversy, because there were other people that had already beat me there, and they're having their fun doing that, and I just didn't see the need to participate in that.
And then you say the face isn't the only evidence, obviously, for a previous civilization on Mars and artifacts and all that stuff. What would you say are some of the other evidence or the better aspects and stuff that people should look at and maybe bypass the whole face issue? Because the face has become sort of like the Roswell of Mars artifact research, where it's just oversaturated.
Right. Well, you have a degree of bisymmetry in the Cydonia region with a number of landforms, and even if the face, the framing mesa itself is interesting. Because it's so bilaterally symmetric, even if it didn't have any facial features at all. And I'm aware that some people claim they don't see the facial features. Nevertheless, I think they're pretty clear once you look at the originals and look at the original Viking images taken in the 1970s and look at the newer pictures. Even if the facial features were non-existent, you would still see a high degree of bilateral symmetry. And while nature is not incapable of producing such forms, it's rather unlikely compared to the probability of seeing much more rounded, amorphic features. And to be sure, you've got lots of features in Cydonia that look nothing but natural. But at the same time, you have features like the D&M pyramid. It's a very big five-sided pyramid that is quite impressive, actually, and it looks quite symmetrical and quite artificial to me and a number of other people. And there are also other features in the vicinity that also kind of smack of something other than geological processes. And one of those is the main city pyramid, which is due west of the face, and it, like the D&M, it is also five-sided, and that kind of suggests that maybe if these things were intelligently constructed, they were built to conform to a certain motif on the surface. And there are a number of small features, and it's kind of a subtle issue because it's hard to make a poster out of it and just point to people how strange it is. But there are these bright mounds. And on the Viking images, they were just simply bright spots on the Martian surface that certain scientists found interesting. And when it turns out that they form a very, very non-random, at least seemingly non-random, a mathematical signature on the Martian surface, very redundant. And when you calculate and then generate random spots on the surface using the computer and try to find the likelihood of these things occurring naturally, it's like, I think it's literally like millions or billions to one. It's just wow. The gulf is incredible. And this is a kind of a subtle issue because these were just bright dots, and many predictions about what we might see kind of flew around before we got the high resolution images. And it turns out that a lot of these bright dot features really are quite interesting as morphologies and not just points on the surface. There are some that look very much like constructions. And we're not going to know until we go there or get much better images, and the possibility of much better images is within our grasp. Nevertheless, I kind of subscribe to the school of thought that we're not going to know for sure until we actually go there and start taking it seriously and start bringing archaeological tools to our arsenal instead of just looking for the past presence of water. As exciting as that is, it's not the last question we should be asking ourselves.
Yeah. There was a lot of talk over the summer about the ESA pictures of the face, and it was sort of like another blow to the face theory from the general space community. The ESA took actually really good pictures of the face, but that's not what they really showed the public. They showed the public computer-generated perspective shots. And two of them are perfectly valid, or at least appear to be based on existing data. I mean, I've been looking at these pictures in detail for 10 years. Yeah. And from mathematical predictions and actual photographs, and the ones that the ESA produced are just simply the one that made the most waves in the pool was this one image showing this synthetic perspective image of the face from the ground, and you see this horn-like steeple protuberance sticking out of between the eyes, and this feature simply doesn't exist. It's just not there. It was evidently some sort of manipulation, and from consulting with some actual imaging scientists, it appears that this is the product of a vertical elongation of the face, and it's not an actual feature. Whether it was placed there deliberately, kind of like how NASA introduced the high-pass filter to the original so-called cat box image of the face in '98, or whether it's simply the result of bad computer work, I don't know. But it's not there, and the fact that it detracts from the face-like resemblance that the face really does have is rather disappointing. I would have expected more from the ESA, which has generally been a little more accepting and a little more open of the possibility of life. In fact, they had landed the Beagle 2 lander, which crashed, and that was to be the first craft on the Martian surface to actually be equipped to test for life forms in the soil since the Viking landers in the 1970s, and that was a real big blow because I think we probably would have found it. In the book, you sort of say that the Mars anomaly community exploded in 1998 with the cat box image. Sort of, can you talk a little bit about just the Mars anomaly community in general, leading up to that explosion and then since? Because, like you said, it's sort of a niche group. It's apart from the UFO field. A lot of them don't really want to be even associated with UFOs, and so it's hard to get a real grasp on the evolution of that.
And vice versa, definitely. Yeah. I think it's like a kettle boiling. We had these very intriguing photos from the 1970s showing some very interesting features on Mars. And those were circulated, and pretty much the speculation. You can only speculate so much before you start getting just red in the face. And when we finally got these new pictures in from the Mars Global Surveyor, as it's going into its orbiter on Mars, it took those pictures very early in its mission. And it came kind of as a shock wave, and it coincided very fortuitously with the beginning of the World Wide Web as we know it. Yeah. And the websites that went up around this thing were just amazing. I mean, you could just wade through these things for days with these analyses of the face. And some people were claiming that NASA had dropped nuclear weapons. I'm not making this up. They actually claimed that they had tried to destroy the face to account for the fact that it didn't look quite like the face that we all knew and loved from the 1970s. Those people making that claim had no appreciation for the fact that if you look at something in much greater resolution, you're going to see lots more detail on the surface. Yeah. And if we're looking at an artificial sculpture, then it stands to reason that it's going to look beat up and abraded. No one's suggesting that this is an inhabited structure or some sort of oracle that's maintained on a regular basis, a museum piece. Yeah. This is old. If we're looking at artificial constructions, they're likely many, many thousands of years old, possibly predating humankind as we know it. And so you had all these sentiments like that just boiled up and reached a peak in 1998, and it was compounded by the fact that Mainland Space Science Systems, the subcontractor for NASA in charge of the photos, had agreed to release everything, not only as they came in, images of Cydonia features that researchers were interested in. Not only had they agreed to release them in real time, essentially they had violated their promise to announce them beforehand, imaging opportunities. And in some cases, they were sitting on images for like 6 months before releasing them. And, while I don't think there's any evidence that anything's been doctored or anything like that, this was obviously very heavy fuel for some of your diehard conspiracy theorists. And it kind of polarized the debate even more. And it became the landscape, the Mars anomaly landscape became extremely cynical, and not without some reason, but it became predictable in a way that was not very stimulating to me. Because to me, the issue was still, what are these landforms? And to too many people, it was, okay, they're artificial. NASA knows it. Let's move on. Let's get the truth. So you started having little online movements that were very reminiscent of like the Disclosure Project. Yeah. And that kind of left a bad taste in my mouth.
Because you're like more open-minded, and you seem to be seeing it.
Well, I'm agnostic. I'm a cautious advocate of artificiality. I think that we will ultimately discover that there are alien artifacts on Mars, and I think that's going to have great bearing on who we think we are as a species. And it's uncomfortable to see such an interesting prospect sullied by this need to believe. Yeah.
What's happened really since the 98 explosion? Would you say that the Mars anomaly community's petered out, or the well's kind of running dry, or just sort of ebbs and flows with whatever is going on with the mainstream sciences work on Mars?
Well, it continued to grow after 1998 because more and more images were taken, and it became almost kind of like this celebratory atmosphere. Let's go. More images, all right. Let's spend the next few months just going over them with a fine-tooth comb, and that was kind of exciting and fun. And that was part of the raison d'etre of the Cydonian imperative. It was fun to get these images and take a close look and ask what are we seeing here? Could this possibly be artificial, or are we looking at weird geology, or some combination of both? And that continued for a while, and I think now we've reached the point where it's kind of just going with the flow. The Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft just recently went offline. It's not returning images anymore. However, we have an even better spacecraft in orbit, equipped to take pictures of the surface, and it's called the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Yeah. And it has near spy camera resolution. It's got like 15 centimeters per pixel. Oh, wow. Which is really good, yeah. We can look at individual boulders with this thing, and we already have. It's already distinguished the Pathfinder mission. ensemble on the surface. And, those weren't big vehicles by any means. Those are rather small. So, we have a platform in orbit right now that could really help us resolve some important questions at the heart of the debate. And hopefully that will have a revitalizing effect on the scientific aspect of the online anomaly movement, and kind of drag it out of the political mire. Nevertheless, I don't think politics are going to be going away anytime soon, because as long as we have to deal with the JPL as the mediator between these images and the public, it's going to present a problem, because they are openly hostile to the possibility that Mars might have not only life, but let alone, giant megalithic architecture. So this is going to be kind of a problem, and it's going to be pretty interesting, I think. And it's possibly going to breathe some more life into it. And I'm still waiting for images that might confirm some of the more subtle artificial-looking features noted in the last volley of Mars Global Surveyor photos, such as an eye on the face. There's a very obvious looking eye on one half of the face on Mars that looks very humanoid.
Yeah,
it's almond shaped. It has a nice little elliptical basin and a pupil-like structure in the middle. And this wasn't even visible in the old Viking photos. So the odds of having a secondary feature confirm the impression of an anthropomorphic likeness on the Martian surface is highly unlikely if this is a natural formation. So I'm very interested in that, among other features.
One aspect that you talk about in the book on the Mars anomaly community, and it's a sort of even more of a sub aspect of Mars anomaly, and that's these sort of Martian Nazca lines, if you will. You know what I'm talking about here?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, because they don't get much press.
In many cases, they don't deserve very much press, because they're pretty ink blot. They kind of fall into that category. But again, they present an interesting epistemological challenge to debunkers, because we have. I'm talking about like profile features. Like there's one called Nefertiti, which looks a lot like Nefertiti, except it's seen in profile. And there are lots of those like that. People see these. Profile visages of human faces and other objects, animals and so forth on Mars, and most of the time these are very, very selective, and they don't impress me at all. But nevertheless, they kind of present an interesting challenge to how we know what we know, and that's kind of where my interest lies regarding these, because we have features on Earth that built by like the Peruvians with the Nazca lines and other Indian cultures in North America. That were built in profile and to resemble actual likenesses, animal likenesses, and so forth. And they look, like kind of abstract, but nevertheless they are artificial. Mm-hmm. So if you see a profile that looks something like a human face on Mars, it's much easier to get a profile than a frontal view. Like the Old Man of the Mountain is cited as an example by debunkers. Yeah, and there are other examples all over the world. So there's less information involved with features like this and that enables the imagination to kind of fill in the blanks. But that doesn't necessarily preclude the possibility that they might be real. So perhaps we shouldn't discount them immediately. At the very least, maybe we should kind of study the mechanics of perception involved when we're looking at these things, and apply that and deal with it usefully, instead of using it as just instant fodder for debunking arguments, which are already pretty lame anyway. Yeah. Because the fact is, if we're dealing with an alien species on Mars, then who knows what they were up to, and for that matter, who knows what technological level they were at. We don't know if you're dealing with a high-tech civilization, some sort of planet-hopping civilization that passed through our solar system long ago, or a civilization that evolved on Mars and had the technological abilities associated with like a Bronze Age or Egyptian culture. There are lots of unanswered questions, and I think some of our stubborn refusal to deal with the Martian enigmas kind of stems from our own grudging ignorance of when Mars was able to support life, how little we know about the planet itself, to say nothing of the role of intelligence
All right, now I should probably ask you about the sort of 400-pound gorilla in the room on when you're discussing Mars and the face and all that good stuff, and you know where I'm going to say now.
I think so.
And that's Richard C. Hoagland. He's sort of the black hole of Martian face research.
400 pounds. This is more like at least 1,000 pounds.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, if I don't mention him, then we're kind of skirting the issue. So let's talk about Richard C. Hoagland as much as you want to say without trying to get me sued or anything.
No, Richard Hoagland his Monuments of Mars is a wonderful book. It's a wonderful speculative book, and it's quite informative, and it incorporates lots of early research and lots of interesting anecdotes about some of the people originally involved with the inquiry. And I think really very highly of some of Richard Hoagland's work. I don't think very highly of some other of Richard Hoagland's work.
Yeah.
His more recent output, to me, is not very impressive. And it seems to me that the combination of discovering the Internet and I was referred to the kind of waiting interim period between the 1976 images and the new Mars Global Surveyor images. I think that kind of cabin fever while waiting for some new inputs from some new data from Mars, didn't really bode well for his sense of scientific caution. We've got lots of rather elaborate numerical analyses of the Martian surface that are the numbers don't work because we don't have resolution that accommodates that kind of tolerance.
Yeah.
He's referring to features like relating features to each other to a degree of accuracy that we're simply unable to do with even some of the images we have now with the good probes. Let alone the Viking images. And I think he had already kind of cemented his own position on what these features entailed, and went about kind of forcing a lot of these discoveries into what he already knew subjectively was the case. And he's an immensely popular figure. He's on late night radio all the time. Yeah. He's entertaining. He's articulate. He seems like a pretty nice guy, and but that doesn't mean that I agree with what he's saying. And he seems to fulfill the role of an entertainer more than he does as a scientific personality. I mean, I think he presents himself as kind of like the Carl Sagan of Cydonia. Mm-hmm. And I'm not exactly sold on that. I mean, when I use the term entertainer, I mean that in a good sense. I'm being kind of, charitable. I'm not trying to be condescending. And I think he's well aware that he's an entertaining figure and kind of goes for that. But I'm just very skeptical of Hoagland, and don't think as highly of his later work as I do of his earlier work. And that's basically the extent of it. It's nothing personal. I just don't think his new stuff is as good as his old stuff.
There you go. Yeah. I had to ask. That's how it works. Yeah. Just touching on this anomaly community in and of itself, as you said, it's sort of tightly knit, and you didn't want to get pigeonholed into it. But what was the reaction of the community when you started putting your work out there? Because there's a lot of talk when I talk about ufology with people about how there's sort of that it's sort of a closed society, and you sort of got to work your way in and everything. And I assume it was sort of the same way with you in the Mars anomaly community. So maybe just talk about your integration into that community and what that was like.
Yeah, initially there was a combination of resentment, and some people really, really liked where he's coming from. It's like, okay, this guy, he's not claiming all the answers, and this was very refreshing to lots of readers. To be able to look at some images and think about them without being told what they're seeing, and told all about the attending NASA cover-ups and everything. Yeah. So there was some appreciation there, but there was also some resentment, like, well, hey, Hoagland's he's the expert here. Who's this guy? Well, who cares what you have to say? You're a Hoagland wannabe. That was leveled at me by a few people associated with Hoagland, and it's silly because it's obvious that I'm not trying to be anything like Hoagland. But yeah, it was a mixed reaction. Overall, it was positive, and the fact that I was able to get write a book kind of summarizing my basic position on this whole inquiry was very gratifying.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it sounds like the Mars anomaly community has the same amount of turf wars that you expect.
It's nothing but turf wars. It's every bit as ugly as the UFO community. But yeah, you're right. It's very insulated. It's very often its own little convention hall, and what goes on there isn't really noted by anyone else.
Yeah.
And to a degree, that's a good thing. But on the other hand, the very fact that you're hermetically sealing yourself in this little fan-like community is unhealthy for other elements of the spectrum. And I just am unable to see these things in isolated boxes.
Yeah.
I can't help but feel that there is a thread of commonality through all this, and Mars is just a component of a much larger mystery.
Yeah. And another fascinating aspect that you talk about is, and this I really enjoyed, because I really do like people, and you definitely seem to do this with not just this work, but your later work that we're going to talk about, is that you take a really nice big picture perspective on these things. It's nice that you pull back from the low level sort of arguments and take a really good big picture look at things. And one aspect of that I noticed in After the Martian Apocalypse was Face on Mars as meme.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just fascinating. Let's talk about that.
No, the Face on Mars is an ideological product.
Yeah.
And I compare it to the alien face meme. We all know, for example, now what aliens look like. They're big and big heads. Big bald heads with big insect-like eyes and little spindly necks and slit mouths and nostrils. And that's thanks in large part to, not entirely, but it really achieved a lot of momentum with the publication of Whitley Strieber's Communion in 1987. That image really resonated with a lot of people in a very interesting way. And then you had it minimalized even further by, there was a cartoonist, well, there still is, I don't know what he's doing right now, Bill Barker. He had this wonderful comic strip called Very Paranoid. It's kind of like if Franz Kafka did a single panel comic strip, it would look a lot like this. And it was called Schwa. And at one time it had a really good online presence, and it's laid low.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find right now. But anyway, he kind of made this very iconic alien emblem with the big eyes, and he deleted the mouth, deleted the nose, and it just became the symbol, and it just it's a very portentous symbol. I mean, you saw it and you knew what it meant. Oh, we're dealing with aliens. We're dealing with weird stuff. And he just kind of made it iconic. Mm-hmm. And the Face on Mars is kind of in the same realm as that ubiquitous alien head. It's a consumer archetype now, and it's kind of emblematic of the unknown in a very specific sense.
Yeah.
It kind of touches the viewer's mind in a way that nothing else really can. It's part of a visual vocabulary that's sprung up. And the whole idea of the meme as an infectious idea is kind of relatively new science, and it deals with the spread of information in a viral manner.
Yeah.
And the internet has totally given this thing its own playing field in a way that even the print media didn't have before that. We're able to see ideas traverse the globe in microseconds and spring up in weird new ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing almost a form of artificial life. And, ideas don't necessarily fare well because they're accurate, although that sometimes helps, but simply because people enjoy having them. People enjoy experiencing or savoring an idea, mm-hmm. no matter how unwieldy or inaccurate it might be, or how fragile it might prove to be. And in one chapter in After the Martian Apocalypse, I just kind of stand back and look at this whole ideological landscape associated with the Face on Mars and aliens, in quotes,
yeah,
and UFOs and leaked documents and NASA cover-ups and all this stuff, and it becomes almost irrelevant if it's fact or fiction at a certain point, and it just becomes this. Just this rippling, seething mass of information. This is very interesting to take in from an aesthetic point of view, almost. And that's an aspect of this whole Fortean scene that eludes some people, I think. Not everyone by any means, but most people are still committed to this. I believe this, or I don't believe this. I think it's all crap, and I think that's an unproductive way of dealing with this new ecology of information that's been emerging and continues to grow every day.
Almost as if whether it's right or wrong isn't really as important as the fact that it exists in and of itself.
Exactly. It's very postmodern and very kind of conceptual. It's kind of like looking at concept art or something.
Yeah.
But it's educational. You can learn from it. You can if you're willing to stand back and look at this thing from a healthy clinical distance and just appreciate it for the sheer absurdity of it. It's actually quite a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of that about the UFO phenomenon itself. And that.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, all the politics and all the claims and counterclaims, and at what point do you at some point you just kind of stop caring what's real on a certain level, not your main level.
I know exactly what you mean.
Right, you just kind of take it all in, and almost on a subconscious level, you appreciate what's going on, the ebb and flow of it.
Yeah. Now, do you tackle moon artifacts at all? Have you ever touched that realm of that's sort of a offshoot of the Martian artifacts community?
There are some weird features on the moon. I'm not an expert on them, but there are enough strange features on the moon and repeated observations of lunar transient phenomena, for example, that make me think that there could very well be some interesting features waiting to be discovered on the lunar surface. And that's neat because the moon is only 3 days away, whereas Mars is, the better part of a year. And it's a lot easier, obviously, to get to the moon than Mars. So if there is something waiting for us on the moon, whether it be some sort of monolith or something much more, trivial, in an extraterrestrial context, ruins of some sort, that's going to tell us a lot about who we think we are. And so I'm hopeful that a future moon probe, or maybe even something we have up there now, will show us evidence of this, and that we'll get it in a forthright manner, and we'll be able to. It'll hasten our breaking out of this shop-worn skeptic-believer dichotomy, which I don't have any patience for.
Yeah, and then sort of to close out this Mars discussion, where do you see the Mars work going from NASA? And you sort of alluded that you don't think we're going to really get to the bottom of the space Sidonia anomaly situation until we have men on Mars or archaeological work being done there. So where do you see this Mars work going from NASA in the future?
I can't help but feel that there must be some interest somewhere within the NASA chain of command. Someone somewhere is going to propose. Let's take a look at this feature. Let's go take a dig and take some ultrasound readings and see if there might be something to this.
Yeah.
That's assuming, of course, that we make it to Mars. And right now, it looks like that's in the itinerary. It looks like we will be going to Mars eventually, and I certainly hope so. Probably can't get there fast enough for my own point of view, but yeah, I think we're going to be going back to Mars and back to the moon rather, and then on to Mars from there. And from then, it's probably only a matter of time until we have the answer one way or another. Once we establish a presence on the planet and start sending crews out to explore and take specimens and flirt around with the idea of terraforming the planet and stuff like that. Eventually, we're going to either stumble across something, or we're going to make a directed attempt to discern whether something once thought to be artificial is or isn't. So it's probably an unstoppable process at this point.
Yeah.
What remains a variable is whether or not this is made is made public, is made accessible to the masses, and that's where all the cover-up theories come in, obviously.
Now, do you think if it turned out that the face was real, like in the sense that it was an artificial structure, that the government would let the people know, or what's your take on that whole thing?
Well, it would depend on what the face represents. If it represents a Bronze Age technology or something, in other words, something not in advance of our own technology, maybe so. If it's built by someone that was more advanced than we are, then we might see more of a paranoid mentality arise. because digging into it would entail possibly giving people information that we can't, quote unquote, can't handle, at our stage of development. But that's an assumption made by lots of people that the face is invariably made by extrasolar aliens that are godlike. And from looking at the features on Mars, my impression is that whoever made these things, assuming hypothetically that they were indeed made, weren't godlike. They weren't infallible aliens. They were they had very limited resources, and that invites the notion that they might have been human in some way that we don't really know, that our textbooks don't really give any don't offer any recourse. Yeah. In other words, we're kind of venturing into some uncharted waters with this.
Mm-hmm. The stuff on Mars, as far as Sidonia, that looks more like something you'd see in ancient Egypt.
And it's been noted before. Some people even go so far as to say, "Well, the ancient Egyptians must have invented space flight and flown to Mars and built this stuff." And I don't think that for a minute. But at the same time, there's this eerie. The fact that we're able to look at this stuff and associate with it and make sense of it on an aesthetic level. The fact that the face is humanoid, for crying out loud, that's not what we would necessarily expect from visitors from some other solar system.
Yeah.
And it implies a terrestrial connection of some kind, and I think that's been the kiss of death for many researchers who are trying to prove this terrestrial connection and come up with some really ludicrous ideas. Then again, who's to say what's ludicrous and what's not? There are no maps for these territories.
Yeah. I was just thinking it would be a refreshing day when they do land in Sidonia and get some answers. Hopefully we'll be around when that happens. So
I think we will be. Yeah, and it's going to be refreshing for me whether the face is rock or whether it's an artifact.
Yeah.
I just want an answer. I don't want to believe anything in particular, and some people refuse to take me at face value when I say that, but I really don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it just in and of itself, it'll be fascinating, and I think the reaction will be possibly even more fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, Mars has no shortage of discoveries in store for us. We don't need the face of Mars. Some people have argued about UFOs and stuff. It's like, why can't people just be interested and fascinated by the universe on its own terms? Why do we need to populate it with UFOs and stuff? Well, these people are ignorant in the sense that they're not aware that the UFO phenomenon, for example, is quite real and seems to represent something physical and unknown. But the point they have is valid. The universe is rather strange, and if UFOs and the face on Mars and other enigmas like this didn't exist, for me personally, there wouldn't be any real psychological advantage to inventing them.
That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. Big thanks to Mac Tonnies for coming on the show. He'll be back next week for part 2 of 2. If you want to find out more about Mac Tonnies, his blog is posthumanblues.blogspot.com, posthumanblues.blogspot.com, and his formal website is mactonnies.com, mactonnies.com. Moving right along now, it's time for Binnall of America Audio listener feedback, and this week's letter comes from a person billed only as Towner. Here's what Towner has to say. While interviewing your guests, you keep saying yeah, over and over. It drives me crazy. Why not just let the speaker get their point across in silence? This would make for a much better show. Stop the yeah after every sentence. Signed, Towner. Thank you very much for the feedback, Towner. I appreciate the constructive criticism. I have noticed over the course of the last season and a half that I have picked up some hosting foibles, some strange catchphrases, if you will, and definitely the yeah is one of them. When we tape the next batch of interviews, I will make it a point to refrain from using the yeah, and hopefully it will be noticeable to those of you in the audience who have noticed it and find it cringeworthy. Thank you again for writing in, Towner. Stick with us, and hopefully you'll enjoy listening to the evolution of BOA Audio. If you would like to be a part of Binnall of America Audio listener feedback, simply go to binnallofamerica.com, click the contact button in the top right-hand corner of the screen. That will put you on the page with the appropriate contact information. or write to boaaudio@hotmail.com. Either one of those methods will put your correspondence on the road to being featured on Binnall of America Audio Listener Feedback. Up next, it's time to thank the great BinnallofAmerica.com staff: Leslie, Chiron, Arlie, Joe V, Ralph Molesworth, and Tina Senna. Thank you so much for your help and support with the audio series and the website. If you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the fantastic columns from the BOA staff, you're only getting half the story. Compelling, esoteric reading material produced week in and week out from the fine folks at BinnallofAmerica.com. Definitely check out their columns. You will not be disappointed. BinnallofAmerica.com. Make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. If you're a long-time Binnall of America audio listener or an appreciative newcomer and you want to help support the audio series and the website, simply click the PayPal button at BinnallofAmerica.com and make a donation. Every donation helps, no donation is too small, and all donations go towards keeping BOA Audio on the air and available to our many listeners worldwide. Next week on the program, part 2 of 2 with Mac Tonnies, crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, and esoterica in general. It is going to be almost double the length of this week's installment. It broke down in a strange sort of way. An hour on Mars, an hour on the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, and an hour on the world of esoterica in general. Instead of splitting that crypto-terrestrial hour in half, I opted to run 2 hours next week and 1 hour this week. So next week's will be an expanded edition with Mac Tonnies. For starters, the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis has taken the esoteric world by storm and has been a major talking point throughout the last year at least. We're going to talk about how it all started, how Mac came up with this whole thing, and what the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis is. If you've only vaguely heard about it but haven't really investigated it, now's your chance next week on BOA Audio, because we're going to dig into the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis and cover it from a plethora of different angles. After that, we're going to talk about esoterica in general, focusing really on ufology, youth in ufology, ufology on the internet, disclosure, and just tons and tons of other stuff. We really cover a wide variety of stuff in the last hour of the interview, so it's a jam-packed edition of BOA Audio next week with Mac Tonnies, part 2 of 2, preview forthcoming at BOA. And on that note, we're going to call it a week. Thank you very much for listening, folks. Until you hear from me next week, this is Tim Binnall, signing off.